On the heavy mahogany desk lay a single folder. Its contents weighed more than the lives of 300,000 people. Can a signature on a document be deadlier than a machine gun? The story of Koki Hirota proves that it can. Tokyo, the Foreign Ministry. The office is warm, safe. The only sound is the rhythmic ticking of an expensive grandfather clock. It drowns out the phantom screams rising from the paper. Inside are desperate cables, American missionaries, foreign embassies, a German businessman named John Rabe. They are describing hell. Hirota's manicured fingers pick up the report. His eyes slide over words like rape, looting, and mass execution. He dips a gold-nibbed pen into the inkwell. He marks the document, read. Consider the difference. John Rabe was a card-carrying Nazi. He was out in the streets of Nanjing, physically pulling Chinese civilians from under Japanese bayonets. Koki Hirota was a civilized diplomat. He chose to stay seated. He observed every rule of etiquette, while the Imperial Army violated every law of God and man. He did not throw the papers at the generals. He did not threaten to resign or go to the press. That would be improper. Instead, he forwarded the formal protest to the Army Ministry. He politely requested an update. The general sent back a memo promising that military discipline would be maintained. Everyone in the room knew it was a lie. Hirota accepted the paper anyway. 300,000. That was the true weight of the paper Hirota filed into the archive. In reality, the document described hell on earth. December 1937, Nanjing. The Yangtze River turned red against the winter snow. Ice floes knocked against floating corpses. The current choked on the dead. On the streets, command discipline didn't just break, it evaporated. Soldiers stopped being soldiers, they became butchers. Surrendered troops dropped their weapons. They were bayoneted where they stood. Women, children, the elderly. The violence wasn't tactical, it was recreational. For 6 weeks, the city became a slaughterhouse. 300,000 dead is more than the entire population of 1930s Bordeaux. A metropolis, erased. But the walls had eyes. Foreigners refused to evacuate. American missionaries, diplomats. The German businessman John Rabe. They watched the city burn from their windows. They saw everything. The catastrophe of Nanking was not a random event. Koki Hirota poured the concrete for it in March 1936. Why did a civilian prime minister voluntarily handcuff himself? The answer is fear. Upon taking office, Hirota revived a single bureaucratic rule. The minister of the army must be an active-duty military officer. It sounded like protocol. It was a coup by other means. Under this law, the prime minister could not appoint his own cabinet. He had to beg the general staff for a candidate. If the army refused to send a general, the government could not form. If they withdrew their general, the government collapsed. Civil society didn't just lose influence, it lost the keys to the building. The army now possessed a legal veto over the nation's future. The weapon was forged in law. Now the army swung it in reality. Hirota returned to the cabinet under Prince Fumimaro Konoe, but the power dynamic had shifted. He was no longer the architect, he was a witness. July 1937, nighttime. Gunshots cracked near the Marco Polo Bridge outside Beijing. A minor skirmish in the dark. It should have been a diplomatic footnote. The army turned it into a pretext for invasion. Tokyo refused to call it a war. They labeled it an incident, a legal fiction to avoid American sanctions. But inside the prime minister's residence, the atmosphere was heavy. The conference of relevant ministers was a theater of polite agreement. No shouting, no pounding on tables, just the rustle of heavy maps unfolding on the polished wood. The creak of leather chairs as men shifted their weight. The army demanded an escalation. They wanted 3 full army divisions sent to the continent immediately. Hirota sat at the table. He was the foreign minister, the one man paid to prevent this. He looked at the maps. He looked at the generals. And he said nothing. He offered no alternative. He raised no objection. He let the silence fill the room until it became consent. That specific decision, not to object, would place the Imperial Army directly at the walls of Nanking 5 months later. The cabinet signed the deployment order. Hirota's silence was not a tactic. It was a reflex born of the carnage that stained Tokyo just 3 days earlier. Finance Minister Koki Takahashi did not die on a podium. He died in his own bedroom. Rebel soldiers stormed the house, found the 80-year-old man in his nightclothes, and emptied their pistols. There was no sanctuary. Lord Keeper of the Privy Seal Makoto Saito was gunned down in his home. Inspector General Jotaro Watanabe was hunted and killed before he could dress. The assassins didn't run. They occupied the Sano Hotel. They seized the War Ministry. For 3 agonizing days, the government of Japan evaporated. No police, no cabinet meetings, just young officers with machine guns holding the capital hostage. It took the emperor himself to break the deadlock, a direct command. The mutineers surrendered, and the ringleaders faced the firing squad. But the message was delivered. With the moderate voices dead or cowed, the Imperial Army emerged from the failed coup with absolute leverage over the civilian cabinet. What did young officers killing their own ministers want? An empire that knew no borders. Blood soaked the tatami mats at dawn on February 26, 1936. It was the day the civilian government's spine finally snapped. Tokyo was buried under unusually heavy snow, a silent, white blanket over the capital. By noon, the drifts were stained red. The killers weren't enemies at the gate. They were the nation's best sons, lieutenants, captains, 20-somethings drunk on the ideology of Kodoha, the imperial way. They saw the politicians as rot, corrupt obstacles to destiny. Their map of the future didn't end at the coastline. It swallowed Manchuria. It consumed China. It demanded total hegemony over East Asia. While the cabinet debated budgets, the youth debated with Type 14 pistols. For 4 days, the center of Tokyo was occupied by 1,500 rebels. In a Tokyo screaming with rebellion, one face remained paralyzed by calm. Koki Hirota made silence his trade. Colleagues found him impenetrable, a man without a pulse. In the corridors of the Foreign Ministry, this was his armor. He graduated from Tokyo Imperial University and began a methodical ascent. No emotions, only protocols. By 1923, he controlled the Europe and America department. By the 1930s, he sat in Moscow. Dealing with the Soviet Union required nerves of steel. Hirota offered something better, a face that revealed nothing. He chose every word like a surgeon choosing a scalpel, withheld everything else. Being impossible to read is a quality ideal for poker. It is fatal for a national leader in a crisis. Society mistook his lack of expression for depth. The diplomatic corps praised his restraint, but the courtroom saw it differently. What passed for wisdom in the ministry became a crime in the dock. The silence that saved his career eventually secured his death sentence. Before he wore the mask of a diplomat, he was just a boy running from the dust of Fukuoka. February 14, 1878. Koki Hirota enters the world. His father, Tokubei Hirota, is not a general. He is not a politician. He cuts stone. The soundtrack of Koki's childhood is the rhythmic strike of a hammer. Clack. It is the sound of labor, not power. Tokubei spends his life carving monuments for other men. You can still find his name on a plaque in Higashi Park today. A craftsman, a laborer, invisible to the elite. But the son watches the stone dust settle on his father's rough hands. He decides he will not spend his life covered in it. In a society built on rigid castes, Koki sees a ladder. He would not carve history for others. He would become the monument. He desperately wanted to matter. The path from the dust of Fukuoka and the polished desks of Tokyo ended here, on the freezing concrete of Sugamo Prison. December 23, 1948, pre-dawn. The air was biting. Breath turned to white steam in the floodlights. The only sound was the rhythm of footsteps. Click. 7 men walked toward the wooden structure in the center of the yard. 6 of them marched with the muscle memory of soldiers. Generals, field marshals, men who had commanded millions across the Pacific. Even in disgrace, they wore the remnants of uniform. The 7th man stood out. He wore a suit. Koki Hirota, He was 70 years old, an age for bouncing grandchildren on a knee, not climbing a scaffold. He had never held a rifle. He had never ordered a charge. His weapon was a fountain pen. His battlefield was a quiet room with a heavy door. He believed that civility was armor. He thought that a bureaucrat could not be judged like a warrior. He was wrong. The trapdoor opened.
Koki Hirota became the only civilian executed by the International Military Tribunal for the Far East.